First question, I need to ask both of you. There's a difference between gender and sexuality. Now, there's a lot of talk about it, a lot of confusion. Please explain that to people who don't understand the difference.
Well, gender is what's between your legs, and sexuality is what's between your ears.
Well, but gender is also what's in your head,
Correct.
because there's a lot of different ways of thinking about who you are and how you identify. And I think there's a lot of people that don't understand that gender is fluid, like sexuality is fluid, but they're separate. They're not the same structure, because you can identify as a gender that your physical body may not relate to, but you may be sexually attracted to what corresponds to your quote-unquote gender norm. So you may identify as a male, but be a female, but still be attracted to men. So the gender side of that is how you feel about who you are, and the sexual aspect, the sexuality aspect is about like who you are attracted to.
Okay, so respond to this. Are you born male or female? Can you? Is that it? You're born male or female, and that's it? Do you think?
No, that's not it.
No.
Chromosomes, hormones, everything comes into play. And in theory, which is not fact yet, a male that feels they are female, they've done autopsies, and the brain in a trans woman is the same as a genetic female. So they're thinking that somehow during the hormone flushing, your brain was flushed as one gender, but your body was flushed as another gender.
So there's a lot of argument that people will say, all right, you are choosing your sexual orientation.
I wish it was that easy to be a choice.
Well, talk to me about it. What are your perspectives on that?
Well, you know, when you talk to trans people, whether it's female to male or male to female, in their younger years, they think that those feelings will go away. But they don't. The older they get, the stronger those feelings get, until finally they're at a point they're not going to live as the gender they were given at birth. They're going to commit suicide. That's why the suicide rate for young trans individuals, 41%. Very high.
Yeah, and coming from a gay man's perspective, I mean, there is absolutely no choice. It's kind of like you don't just say one day, oh, I really like guys, I think they're better, and there you go. It's a whole progression. I mean, and a lot of people, and especially a lot of gay people that I know, say that, well, thinking back at it, I always liked boys, or I always liked girls. And, you look back at your life and you kind of just see the things that you were doing and how you were behaving in certain situations. And you're kind of like, oh, okay, there is no choice. I mean, it's like, who chooses to risk alienating all of their family and friends?
Exactly.
Who chooses to make life, every aspect of their life more difficult because, oh, yeah, I just want to do this. It's not, I think people call it a choice and it makes it seem flippant. Like, oh, you can just decide what you want to do. No, it's a progression. It's learning who you are, learning your identity. And I think part of the problem is that society has for many, many years, and less so recently, but for many, many years, hasn't given you the option of exploring other options besides being heterosexual. So to say it's a choice is like, well, did everybody who is heterosexual decide and choose to be straight? No. Nobody's ever going to say, oh, I just decided that I wasn't going to like members of the same sex. I was only going to go after members of the opposite sex. No, but I don't think there's probably people who have done that, made that choice, but that's maybe because they weren't comfortable considering themselves bisexual or any other spectrum of the sexuality.
And conversion therapy has never worked
No,
either.
it's
So the idea of choice could also be translated as perhaps fault or a bad choice. You could call something a bad choice. And so in society, we would say that if you're going to say, well, you know, we can correct that because obviously, you know, you made the choice. It isn't in your nature. You weren't made that way. You can change because you made a mental choice. And so it could be perceived as something as a weakness or a...
well, and I would say, speaking from my own experience, I know a lot of gay people, a lot of alternate sexuality people have made the choice to try and not be gay or to look past the feelings that they're having about their gender identity. I would say that a lot more people have chosen to try not to feel what their body and their mind is telling them. And that's way more dangerous. And I personally went through a period of my life where I tried to change my perception, I guess, through religion. And I basically went to all these different churches trying to find something that would, you know, make me fit the stereotypes of what I should be. And it was one of those things where there was just like one day, and I'm very glad that this happened to me when it did. I just said, you know what? This is stupid. If there's a God and God made me who I am, then he made me this way for a reason. So why am I trying to change something when nothing's wrong with me? And I'm happy. I think I'm happy now. There's a lot more awareness of this. So I'm hoping that there's a lot less people trying to say this isn't me and making the choice to be themselves.
Yeah. And so you mentioned this, there's a suicide rate that's very high because there's a conflict in society then. Even though it's not a choice, there's a lot of confusion because as we grow up, we aren't cognizant as kids, as teenagers, that maybe we are built differently from the person next to us and that we have different orientation.
But from a trans perspective, they know at a young age that something's not right. Now, on the other hand, I've seen an individual that tried to transition and said, oh, this is a mistake, and went back to who they were before, to their birth sex. That individual, or those types of individuals, I blame their therapist for not doing a proper job. I've had ladies call me, they 5-year-old child. I said, you got to get them into therapy. They've got to find out. Therapy's, you know, it's got to be a gender therapist to find out really what's going on in their head. So that has to be first and foremost with any person trying to transition.
All right, let me ask you this here, again, a kind of a broad question. The LGBTQ community, that's a big tent kind of theory perspective. For what? Sexual identity? For individual identity? How would you describe that, the big tent? You know, you're reaching out to people who are feeling like they need to be seen for who they are.
Whether they're gay, trans, or questioning.
Okay.
They can come and be safe at our location.
Yeah, it's broad because the more we learn about gender fluidity and sexual fluidity, it's that, you know, it used to be LGBT, it used to be LGB, it used to be this, that, and so we're always adding more acronyms, and so that's why now it's generally LGBTQ plus, because those identities are so many, and we don't want to discourage anybody from presenting what they're feeling. And I think that's why it's so broad, is because we want people to be able to release their sexual being, you know,
Be themselves.
Let them
And
have
be
a safe,
safe.
you know, a lot of people have not been able to express these feelings ever to anybody. And
They come out at home, they get kicked out of their house.
Right. You know, and especially for those people who feel like they don't belong in one of those very strict roles or identifications, those are the people that we really need to be reaching out to even more so, because they may feel even uncomfortable discussing things with someone who's, let's say, identifying as a gay man or a transgender woman or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, it's got to be broad because we want to be all accepting.
I would guess, and there's no scientific basis to this, but I would guess that there have been homosexual and heterosexual preferences, both gender identification issues since the beginning of humanity.
Beginning
right?
of time,
Yet,
correct.
are we still then, in a sense, in a stage of discovery here, where we're trying to, figure all this out in terms of how we react, how we deal with it, how we share that information,
How we accept it.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's the key, is acceptance. People say, well, I want to understand you. They'll never understand anybody unless you're in their shoes. Acceptance is the key. That's the key word. I guess that's the word, the meaning of love is acceptance.
Yeah, there's it's always changing, and you can easily look back in history and we know things, homosexuality was present, and we know First Peoples had First Peoples cultures had identifications for people who considered themselves other sexual orientations or gender identities. And it's always been a part of humanity, and as we've grown as a society and a culture, the more things change. They're always changing about what's accepted and what's not accepted, and things have been always changing. And so right now we're getting to that point where we're able to discuss things with a lot more people than we were ever able to do. So more and more is understood and more becomes publicly available. And so the more, hopefully, people are accepting of those different roles.
And education plays a key role. The more people are educated about it, the more accepting they are. Some countries, you're killed for it, whether you're gay or trans or whatever.
Well, it is the worst of times, it is the best of times. We had a 2016 with Obama in the White House, and things were kind of happening. And we had some very, very big developments in the courts, legislation. We had some fights in our society. But recently, we had what was called Discrimination Sunday in Texas. They passed the bathroom bill, as well as a couple other bills. What do you think? We were going along. It looked like, boy, it's all behind us. We're finally accepting. We're finally saying, we're going to make this a policy that, we're not going to discriminate against people because of their orientation. We're going to make it easier for people with gender identities that conflict with how they perhaps look as young people, perhaps to, make it comfortable for them to go to the bathroom of their choice. Not so in North Carolina or Texas. What's your feeling about what's been developing there?
Well, it's interesting. I guess if a person has to go potty, they got to go potty. And if they're trans, they need to use the bathroom of their gender they're transitioning to.
Well, they can go to a changing station or a single person bathroom. That's part of the, and that's why it's supposedly compassionate, because they're allowing that to happen.
Well, the problem is that people need to pee. People need to poop. Everybody does it.
They go in for two choices, one and two.
And it's like, who even cares? Who is paying attention to the bathroom? Frankly, I once walked into the wrong bathroom, went to the bathroom, and I got out until the point I realized I was in totally the wrong bathroom. Nobody stopped me. Nobody said, "Oh my God, what are you doing in this bathroom?" It's really ridiculous, because there's never been a case of anybody being harmed by somebody going into the bathroom,
whether they're gay or trans.
Gay or trans.
Yeah.
As far as I know, it's not happened. But as far as the whole thing, I think it's people not, as Ann said earlier, accepting people that are living their lives differently than them. Like, you can't necessarily, like, I can't necessarily understand the perspective of a trans person fully. I know I'm not going to be able to, but I want them to live their life as they want to and should be able to. So what's the big deal? You know, I guess I think a lot of it comes from fear.
Exactly.
People are afraid of this monster that doesn't exist. And I think that some, and this is me personally speaking, I think there are some people in our country who prey on that fear to pass a bill or get a vote. Because I kind of wonder how many people in Texas or North Carolina were actually saying, hey, state senator, state congressperson, I need you to pass this bill because I feel threatened. Like, where did it even come from? And maybe that's me, I don't know. But was 70% of the state asking for it? Or was 70% of the state asking for maybe a minimum wage raise? I don't know. So it's difficult because the Obama administration was really nice.
Very liberal.
Very liberal.
Very open.
So is this maybe a tail end skirmish to this conflict where, it's a road bump. For now, Texas will pass this legislation, but the way things are going, people will say in another year or two in other states, they'll say, you know what, this is silly. We're fighting over bathrooms here. And the businesses that are threatening to boycott North Carolina and Texas, what seems to be happening is society in general, especially if you go to younger and younger people, are saying, you know what, this isn't a big deal to us. People maybe of an older age, it's still a little difficult to get used to, but younger people are saying, you know what, this is the world I'm used to, that this isn't shocking to me, and I'm okay with diverse perspectives and opinions. So, you see it going away. Texas is a little thing on the radar. Maybe it's not a big deal. It's just not, Indiana not making wedding cakes for gay couples getting married won't last long.
Well, yeah, and that's an interesting comment. They say, well, if you're a Christian, you make a cake for a gay couple, you're participating in their marriage, you're okay with their being gay. So, a Christian gun owner, gun store, you go and buy a gun and shoot somebody, that makes him a party to the crime because, you know what I'm saying? It's just crazy. Yeah. The Mormons now are forming their own scouting. They're pulling their kids out of scouting because they allow gay leaders
but
now.
Even scouting has come around with public pressure
Exactly.
and public sentiment.
Right.
Well, and I think with the thing with the bathroom bills, and we can't wait. We're not going to wait. I mean, this is a fight that's happening now. It's ridiculous that somebody has to go to a bathroom that they feel uncomfortable in, because what ends up happening is it hurts that person, because then they have to revolve their life about not going to the bathroom when they're not at home. We're not going to sit back and let that happen. I don't care if it's going to take a year, 2 years, 3 years. When we consider the fight for marriage equality, states have been passing marriage equality bills for years, while other states have been denying access to marriage for years, and it's only because there was a case that went to the Supreme Court that it's even legal in the United States. Not going to wait. I mean, I never thought I was going to be able to get married in my lifetime in the United States. I got married in Canada because whoever thought it was going to happen, but it did. And you're right, it's like it's an extension. It's like, okay, well, now that we have marriage, even though we're going to try to reverse it later on, which I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop on that, we're not going to wait for people who feel like they can hold other people back from living their lives equally. I mean, I don't think people understand what it's like to just live every single day and not be heterosexual. Everything is a struggle. And I'm not saying like everything is painful and harmful, but you're always having to consider how people are going to react to you, even if you don't want to. Every single time you meet somebody new, like, oh, what if I talk about my husband? What are they going to think? What if I, at a job interview and they ask me about my wife? well, I don't have a wife, I have a husband. You know, it's every single little interaction that you have. I mean, what if you're working with a client at work and they bring something up? And, well, do you just kind of step away from it and try not to say anything? Or do you say the truth? You know, everything that we do is difficult, and it's more troublesome. And it would be nice if I could just, you know, frankly, I guess I'm very open about who I am, and everybody who knows me knows that I'm gay and that I'm married to a man, because I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression of me. I want people to know that I'm okay with who I am, and I'm not going to be quiet. And there's not as many people as I wish there could be that could be like that.
So homophobia must be an incredibly powerful potion. I mean, if people are reacting so strongly to it, I mean, we are coming around. Is it conversation by conversation? Is it by generation?
It's learned. It's taught. They're taught at a young age.
Yep. And like, that's one of the reasons that I try to be as open as I can be, because I think a lot of what people hear about gay people and what they assume a lifestyle is like, my hope is that by me just being me, those just disappear, because I see I'm just like anybody else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is religion holding progress back? Is Christianity, is the Torah, the Quran, is that the enemy here? Is that the thing that's
I
teaching
wouldn't
people?
call it the enemy, but I guess they're teaching. The Quran teaches, you know, the Muslims have such a hate.
Well, Christians will use the Bible as an excuse. It seems that whenever it's put to them to find the passages, it seems like it's difficult to find those passages where Jesus condemned homosexuality. But
There are none.
but religion seems to come up. It seems to be a moral function of religion to oppose homosexuality in every place and every part of human culture.
I agree with, I personally am agnostic/atheist. And I think that religion has been used to shape people's beliefs about other people. And there are a lot of religions that say absolutely nothing about homosexuality, and there's a lot of religions that do say things about homosexuality. And from my perspective, my hope is that a religion is to bring people betterment to their lives. And so then my question is, how is hating another group of people making your life any better? You know, I think that the Bible itself is like a couple thousand pages long. You know, the Quran is long. You know, all these books that people talk about are very long. And then the things that they tell us that tell this one thing is, you know, one sentence. Well, is that the most important thing out of that whole book? Is that a reason to spend your weekends protesting gay funerals? Is that a reason to block every person from being able to get married that wants to get married? You know, I think we need to look beyond what somebody said 2,000 years ago and maybe look at what's going on today.
Well, and the Bible was written 80 years after the fact, and it was written by man.
Do you each of you personally know Christians who are homosexual and trans people who are Christian?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. It was interesting. When I came back after surgery, my son got married, and the minister says, we need to talk. Fine. A week or so later, went in to chat with him. He says, I want your story. So I went through it and told him the testing that I went through. And he said, I know that test well. It's the MMPI test, Minnesota Multi-Personality. You can't lie on it. And he said, I know that test well. Then I know you went the correct steps. And I said, how do you know it well? He says, my master's was in counseling. So, you know, here's anybody that, you know, and most of these ministers have had their degree in counseling, so they just need to hear that you went the right way.
Yeah.
In the U.S. here, with the progresses that have been made, seemingly pretty dramatic progresses, like you said, Dan, that it seemed like you'd never get married in your lifetime, and yet here we are. We're starting to see these this progress in the world. It's kind of starting to bleed out into the world too. But let me ask this first: is there any going back with the Trump court appointees, with Trump in the White House for the next 3 years? Do you see it going back? Do you see, it was a lot of progress forward. Can it go back? You said we can't let this happen. It's urgent. Can it happen? Is it forming? Are people opposition forming to make that happen right now?
Well, if he gets the right people in the Supreme Court, he could reverse stuff. And that's what he's hoping to do eventually. He said right now it's the law of the land. He can't change it because Supreme Court allowed it. But if he gets a lot of his conservatives, well, how many are going to be replaced over the next 5 years or so? 3, 4? And if he can get the majority in there, he might try to get it reversed.
And I think we can look at another example that's really a big issue amongst conservatives, and that would be Roe versus Wade. We know that they have been fighting and working on making it more difficult and trying to do everything within their power to make it near impossible for people who would, to have abortions. And they've been working at it for years and years and years and years to get it down to where it is in some places nearly impossible. So I, for 1 minute, don't feel that there's not somebody trying to reverse that decision somewhere.
But Roe v. Wade isn't the same thing in terms of discrimination. I think the reason that we're seeing progress is because people in the end, as often as politics is not reasonable, I think people are reasonable about discrimination. They say, you know what? It's not right to say that because somebody thinks differently or believes differently, they should be kept out of legal marriage or that they should be kept out of a business.
And I think my biggest concern is that one of the big talking points is the state versus country. Like states' rights.
Yes.
And so a lot of what people say is, well, it should be a state's right to decide who can get married. So in that regards, it could be the point where something gets to the Supreme Court or somewhere else, and they say, okay, Alabama, you have the right to decide who's able to get married or not. And if that were to happen, then you'd have a fractured system again, where you could get married in some places and you couldn't get married in other places. And it could be that at that point that those states that didn't want to let same-sex couples get married would say everything that happened before is invalid. And I think that's where a lot of we really have to keep fighting for it and make sure that that's not going to happen. Because there's a lot of different things going on in states, and each state is different. And we want to make sure that everybody is equal, regardless of where you live in the United States.
So maybe in the red states, your marriage would be considered annulled, invalid, and
Right,
in blue states, you're good to go.
Right, and that was one of the problems, is that we ended up getting married originally in Minnesota because it hadn't yet become nationally, the Supreme Court hadn't voted yet, We got married in Minnesota, which means, we were legally married in Minnesota, we weren't in Wisconsin. So since we were Wisconsin residents, we couldn't claim joint taxes or anything like that, which was very confusing. And then you get into other issues that all, kind of surround marriage and like adoption and just all the legal things too.
Right.
So that makes it really, the fractured system doesn't work. Because if you need to move for your job and that place doesn't happen to allow same-sex marriage, what are you going to do?
So in the world in general, I just read in the news that the courts in Lebanon handed down some decisions in favor of homosexuality, and they decided in the courts that that's not the kind of practice that should be punished by stoning or imprisonment. It shouldn't be persecuted in Lebanon. That's a big step.
Boy, that is a very big step, yes.
And around the world, we see this kind of battle taking place in some countries that are strongly conservative, Muslim countries, perhaps. In the world in general, are we behind in the United States or ahead of the curve? What do you think?
I think we're ahead of the curve.
Population-wise, I think we're probably ahead of the curve.
We're doing that well.
Because you look at countries like China and India, there's still a lot of struggle.
Saudi Arabia.
Catholic South America.
Well, right, but I'm talking like huge major population centers of the world, like China and India. They don't have as much protection as we do. And you consider that those two countries alone are like, whatever, 20% of the world's population or something. That's a lot of people that we do have more protections than. But I think as far as the rest of the like European countries, we're far behind.
Maybe more issues than that. So if we look at the next year, and let's say the near future, what do you think the biggest battlegrounds are? Where do you see the fights taking place, and what will they look like?
Well, I think the biggest battle is going to come to education and healthcare. I think that's going to be your bigger fights.
But in terms of gender issues and homosexual and LGBTQ issues, where would they?
They're intertwined with those. I mean, if you're a trans person who has not yet transitioned, you need health care to be able to afford the drugs and the operation and the counseling. So if things change with that, you may not have that option because you may not be able to afford an insurance plan that covers those things.
Wait a minute now. Is there actually something you see on the horizon of discrimination against you for sexual orientation in terms of insurance coverage?
Would you consider being transgendered a pre-existing condition?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That's where they get around it.
It's all intertwined. I mean,
How is it covered now?
Therapy and hormones are covered. They won't cover the surgery, but Medicare covers it. And a military VA benefits cover it. If you work for Disney or AT&T or some of these bigger companies, they cover it.
So that could be a big hindrance in trying to decide whether or not you go forward with it, whether or not you can actually afford to do it.
Exactly.
And
There goes your suicide rate.
and education is a huge thing because the more people learn about what's out there and who they can be, the easier it is for them to be who they are. Suicide rate. I mean, we're unfortunately always hearing about young children, young people who never feel comfortable talking to anybody. And so they bottle up all that stuff, all those emotions, all those feelings, until they feel like there's nowhere else to go.
And when you talk education, though, you're not talking about curriculum. I mean, it's not taught, tolerance is not taught in the classroom. Are you talking about on the playgrounds? Are you talking?
Diversity is taught.
Well, diversity education.
Yeah, that's taught in the colleges, high schools.
Yep, and having resources available to communities, like community centers or university centers, all of those play a role in making things better. And so if education's cut, if funding is cut, then there's less resources, which means less people are reached out to, which means less people get to express who they are openly, and life becomes more difficult for everybody.
On the college level, that's probably not as big a threat as in public elementary schools.
Correct.
Yeah, it's definitely not as much, but depending on what state you're in, what college you're attending, there may be less funding for those type of activities, less programs for those activities. So it is, and for a lot of people, college is the first time they may even be experiencing those people.
The freedoms.
The freedoms of seeing gay pride or, just people enjoying themselves being who they are.
Never had that exposure before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so the support network must be better than ever now. in the United
Absolutely.
States.
Yes.
Yes.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, definitely a very good right now.
Yeah.
So in the courts, do you see battles on the horizon here? When we talk about these things, Is this done at the state level then? Is it just going to go to the states? The Supreme Court's going to lay hands off, and Texas and North Carolina and Indiana can decide who they want to serve or where people are going to the bathroom? Is that how it's going to go?
So I think one of the next big issues that we're going to have to deal with is religious freedom bills, where people are saying, well, you're gay, I'm Christian, I'm not going to serve you food. Where does that exactly stop? Because if I'm finding myself in Texas or wherever they have one of those bills and I need to go to the ER,
Right.
I don't want to be denied service because somebody says, well, sorry, you're gay. I don't help gay people. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Or the minute you say, well, I want my husband to come in.
Exactly. Like, oh, no, we don't do that here. You need to leave.
Yeah.
You know, where does that stop? Where does that begin? You know, if you're a business owner and you're trying to serve people fried chicken and somebody comes in with his husband and is like, oh, I'm sorry, we don't serve gay people. Well, okay, if you don't want my money, then I'll go somewhere else. But, you know, the whole economics issue ties into that, but we have to ask, where does this stop? Because, and how does it stop? Is it really a religious test? Is that, well, if I'm an atheist, does that mean that, okay, I can say that my atheism says that I can't help Christians, so I'm just not going to help anybody that has a religion? I mean, is that acceptable under that? I don't know. I don't think it should be, but I think that's where we're going. Is we're going to this place where we're saying, okay, you can discriminate against people because of whatever reason you want. That's not okay. And we've gone through periods of history where we discriminated, segregation.
Right.
That was okay for a while. Well, obviously it was a horrible thing to do, and we never should have done it. So what is this? It's, along a similar vein, but people feel like they have a moral right to say no to somebody. But isn't it a moral right to serve somebody?